We're going to hit the ground running this morning and start with the 3 new charges against the former president in the special counsel's investigation into the handling of classified documents. He also has a new co-defendant, Carlos de Oliveira, a maintenance supervisor at Mar-a-Lago. And this new indictment details the scheme to delete surveillance video at that resort. Here to break down the new charges and reaction, NBC's Garrett Haake in our nation's capital, Von Hilliard near Trump's Bedminster home, former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti, and NBC senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett. Garrett, let's start with you. Walk us through the new charges and what we know about this new defendant.
Well, we get 3 new charges here for the former president, 2 related to this obstruction plot that is alleged here, which also includes the new defendant, and a 3rd related to another classified document kind of added on top of the list of 31, which he was already charged with possessing. Now, as relates to this new defendant, Carlos de Oliveira, he's a maintenance worker, basically, a maintenance supervisor at Mar-a-Lago, and the indictment lays out a series of events in which he has conversations with the former president and then has conversations with other employees, basically saying we need to make the boss wants this surveillance video on this server to disappear. He basically then later tells the FBI he doesn't know what they're talking about. He has no idea what they mean about any of these boxes. And so he winds up with 3 additional charges for himself. He's not a public-facing person. He's not a political person. Donald Trump described him on a radio interview this morning as a loyal member of his staff. And indeed, even that loyalty is discussed in the indictment in the context of whether or not the Trump folks would provide a lawyer for him as we got to this moment.
So there's this whole scene laid out in the indictment where this new co-defendant, de Oliveira, pulls another unnamed Trump employee, identified only as employee 4 here, into a small room known as an audio closet and tells this employee that the boss wants the server with surveillance footage deleted. That employee reportedly says he didn't know how to do it. He didn't believe he had the rights to do it. And the indictment goes on to say, quote, de Oliveira then insists to Trump employee 4 that the boss wanted the server deleted and asked, what are we going to do? Garrett, do we know if it was actually deleted?
Every indication is that it was not, or at least not effectively, because in the FBI's search warrant, the affidavit that came out earlier this month, we learned that it is surveillance video from outside the storage rooms where these boxes were kept. There was a key piece of evidence against Walt Nauta. He's seen going in and out of these rooms, removing more boxes than he ultimately returns, and that was part of the case that the FBI was able to build leading up to his indictment. So if any video was deleted, it was not sufficiently done to prevent more charges being filed in this case.
Laura, does it matter if they never deleted anything?
Nope. The indictment charges him with attempting to do it, and that's all that they need to show. I will be interested to see what further evidence comes out here. Obviously, they have quite a bit of text messages, perhaps audio. You look at that indictment, and they have sort of like quotes. The government doesn't use quotes unless they can back that up in a way that they can prove in court. They're not going to just put things in quotes that would normally just be summarized. And so it makes you wonder, with someone recording this, how did they get that type of information? But they do not need to actually show that anything was actually deleted. And there's reporting out there to suggest there are gaps in that footage. And so we just don't yet know what happened.
What do we know about this person only identified as employee 4?
His name is Yusel Taveras. He's an employee, the IT director there at Mar-a-Lago. We are trying to figure out right now who is he represented by, because you will see a trend in this case where a number of sort of these lower level Mar-a-Lago employees are all represented by the same firm, or at least all paid by Trump's super PAC. And so what we are trying to dig into right now is, who is this person represented by?
Does it sound, Renato, like he could be a cooperator?
Oh, I think very likely. I certainly don't think that Donald Trump wanted him to divulge that information to law enforcement. And I think that really, Anna, the one reason why Jack Smith decided that he was willing to, to risk delay to add another defendant is the hope that there may be more cooperators. I certainly think the additional defendant adds an element where these 2 men have to be thinking, is the other guy going to flip before me? Do I need to worry about him pointing the finger at me? Obviously, they're currently represented by Trump-affiliated lawyers, but as trial gets closer, These are men who ultimately, unlike Donald Trump, don't have billions of dollars and kind of got swept into this. Are they both going to take the fall for him? I think Jack Smith is hoping that one of those two men is willing to flip.
And Renato, they seem to refer to Trump as the boss, but they don't actually say his name. Is the boss solid enough evidence to pin this to Trump?
Yeah, what's going to happen is Trump employee 4 is going to come in and testify that he understood when they were talking about the boss, he understood that to be a reference to Trump, and that is who everyone talked, who everyone, when they use the term the boss, that's who they refer to. So that's what I think is going to happen there. But ultimately, look, that's not the only evidence against Donald Trump, to put it mildly. There's obviously tons of evidence in this indictment, including some new evidence, a new charge related to the document that he was waving around in that recording. I think that's very important as well, Anna. So plenty of evidence. That's just icing on the cake.
Vaughn, what are we hearing from Trump for the first time this morning since we learned about these new charges?
Right. Actually, just in the last hour, we have this new interview with Donald Trump, who is here at his Bedminster Club in New Jersey. I want to preface this interview is with John Fredericks, and this is a very friendly figure to him. His first question out of the gate was about Trump Winery in Virginia. He didn't ever actually directly ask him about this superseding indictment or the charges within, yet Donald Trump brought it up himself. I want to let you listen to his response.
They went after 2 fine employees yesterday, fine people, and I don't think they think that the tapes were even changed. These were my tapes that we gave to them, and they basically then say that's not enough. I don't think we would have had to give it. I'm not sure that we would have even had to give it. These were security tapes. We handed them over to them. I doubt we would have, if we wanted to fight that, I doubt we would have had to give it. But regardless, we gave it.
2 things out of this. Number one, as you just heard there, Anna, Donald Trump didn't actually deny telling the employees to delete this footage. He didn't make that direct denial in this particular interview. The second part of this is that, Donald Trump's defense counsel hasn't been able to even walk into a courtroom and present its defense to a jury. Yet Donald Trump continues to go on these friendly airwaves and lay out his own defensive that have meandered over the last months, from the argument that he was able to hold on to all such material because he declassified it himself upon leaving the White House, but then also arguing in an interview on Fox last month that, in fact, he was just holding up newspapers and articles and not a document related to an Iran military attack. So for Donald Trump, he is only complicating his own legal counsel's defense efforts here as they begin to build their case over the next year.
Now, let me pick up on that second part that Vaughn was just referencing, the other new charge that has to do with the classified military planning document Trump allegedly showed an author and publicist and a couple of staffers at Bedminster. The one Trump later claimed didn't actually exist. But, Laura, it turns out prosecutors have the document. How significant is that?
He had said it was just bravado. He at one point had implied it was just ruffling newspapers. Turns out they got the document, and it's classified. And you know how they got it? Because he actually returned it to him. If you look at the indictment, it lays out a chart, and it has a range of dates for how long he allegedly kept the documents. And it says they received that document back in January 2022. That is the time that he returns the documents to the National Archives. It's the only document in the single set of documents that we have that he actually returned. All the rest of the documents the Justice Department actually had to go fetch from Mar-a-Lago, and his attorney either turned it over or they got it in the search raid.
Renato, Jack Smith's team is still arguing that these new charges should not delay the start of the trial, which is currently slated for May 20th of next year. What do you think this does for the timeline? Any chance that date stays firm?
I think it's unlikely, and I really think that Jack Smith made a judgment call here, Anna. He decided at the end of the day that he was not going to be able to rush to a trial with Aileen Cannon. I mean, he can say that, with a straight face that he expects the trial to go forward. Certainly that's going to be his public posture. But I think he decided that it was more important to him that the strongest possible case against Donald Trump than to raise fine. Because adding another defendant at a later stage, adding new charges, of course, is going to introduce other opportunities to the door.